now.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. So my name is Sarah Segal, and I am full-time staff at the Students Union. I hold the position of Student Advocate and Governance. And so this means my main role at the Students Union is to support students anytime they're facing an issue with the institution. So the scope of my role varies from anything from responding to concerns about fairness, accessibility, accommodations, or adherence to policy and procedure, as well as issues such as academic misconduct, which we'll talk about today. I also work on policy review and revision alongside VIU, and I support students who are in positions of governance at VIU, such as students on Senate or students on Board of Governors. Students who need advocacy can reach me via email anytime. I'm going to put my email address in the chat so that any student can easily connect with me. And typically I meet with students these days over the phone or through Zoom. So I'm pretty available through those channels. I'm not meeting with students in person at the moment because of the pandemic, but I can still provide all of my services. And I found it pretty seamless actually working with students through the means available, either phone or online. It's important to me that students know that I am not employed by VIU. I'm employed by the Students Union, and I can act independently of the institution. This matters because it means my work is directed by students and not by VIU. So when we're looking at issues of fairness related to the institution, I can work independent from the institution. I think it's also important up front for students to know that when I work with them, I keep their information confidential. So a student can come and consult with me, chat with me about what's going on, and whatever happens from there is up to them. So I hear their information, but I don't act on their behalf unless we have a very clear agreement about what that might look like. And even then, my general approach to advocacy is to support students to kind of figure out like the lay of the land of what's possible for them to resolve their concerns, and then to support them in the path that they choose. So sometimes that means I prepare them for meetings, or I help them to understand appropriate policy and procedure, or I might accompany them to a meeting, or help them understand a decision that's been made and possible recourse from there. I've been doing this work with the Students Union for the past 5 years, and my background is in psychology and conflict resolution. I'm currently working on a mediation certificate through the Justice Institute of BC. And prior to this work, I worked in perinatal health education in private practice and nonprofits, providing education and support to new families. I should tell you up front, I'm working from my home office like many people, and there's multiple children somewhere in the background and a puppy. So there may be an interruption at some point. Hopefully it's a cute puppy, well, hopefully we'll get through without any children interfering in the background. I just thought I'd say that up front so everybody knows. And a quick note about questions as we go through this presentation. If you have questions that you want to ask about process, misconduct in general, or my work, there'll be time at the end to ask questions. You can either unmute and ask them or put them in the chat. If you have a specific advocacy question that you need help with, I would encourage you to reach out to me via email so that we can handle that privately. And if you are bringing up any experiences you've had, I would just respectfully ask that you don't share course names or instructor names so that we can be respectful and keep individuals' personal information private. Because this is being recorded and might be shared as a resource later on, I think it makes sense to deal with any really intricate or private issues separate from this opportunity. So when I talk about academic misconduct, for me this topic is near and dear to the work that I do, because every year I work with students who are navigating accusations of academic misconduct and trying to figure out how best to get through that process. I also know that right now academic misconduct is even more of a focus in the academic world because of all of the changes to post-secondary learning and assessment that have come about as a result of the pandemic. So many students are wondering, as Alicia said, about their rights and responsibilities, and faculty and institutions are also kind of considering how to ensure academic integrity remains everyone's priority while we're kind of navigating learning and teaching from home. Throughout this conversation, I'll probably refer to the applicable policy and procedure at VIU on the Student Academic Code of Conduct. I'm going to link this in the chat as well. Many of you might already know about this policy and procedure because often it's included in course outlines, but not always. And so I'll provide a link of where you can find it. You can also generally, if you just search online for the VIU Student Academic Code of Conduct, it'll come up. I should also note this policy is currently undergoing review and revision, and I'm pretty excited about that. I think that all the stakeholders at the institution will be pleased by some of the revisions that are happening. But for now, the link that I'll put into the chat is the one that would apply in any instance where there is academic misconduct concerns. So the link that I've put there actually links to all of the policies and procedures at VIU, and you're going to want to look under the Senate policies and procedures. Senate is the governing body that's responsible for setting out the policies and procedures related to academic integrity and potential consequences from academic integrity. And the policy code is 96.01. The procedures 96.01.001. Okay, so with that opening, I would like to turn it back to Alicia to ask the questions that you had.
All right, so we're going to do this as sort of an interview seminar thing, just because it's easier to get students' most asked questions out that way. So first question is, what's the most common academic misconduct committed that students do not realize is a misconduct?
Yeah, so I really like this question because not realizing something is a misconduct can catch someone off guard, and they find themselves in a situation where maybe they've inadvertently made a mistake that was not intentional. The policy and procedure that I mentioned lay out all the different types of academic misconduct and define them pretty thoroughly. So it's worth taking a look there, and it's worth knowing that, of course, just like law, part of your duty as a student is to know what the policy says in terms of what you're meant to uphold. In terms of which ones are most commonly committed when students don't realize that they're misconduct, I think there's three. One, I would say, is failing to adequately cite material used in. So maybe quoting, not providing a reference, not properly quoting or citing a source for material. And sometimes this is done inadvertently. I definitely know there's cases where, it's late at night and students are trying to finish a term paper and they just forget that one reference to cite in their reference, and it's not intended at all, but it still happens. Other times students may be copy and pasting material that isn't theirs into their paper and not realizing that that's considered plagiarism. So that could be one instance. Another instance that could be considered academic misconduct is when students are working collaboratively or when working independently is actually the requirement of the assignment. So sometimes this is pretty informal. Again, maybe no intention to commit misconduct, but say a study group is working together and somebody posts a draft of their paper to share with their fellow students to say, hey, do you think I'm on track? What do you think about my opening? That can be perceived as misconduct, because if that student then incorporates the ideas of someone else into their paper, the work is no longer entirely independent. So when it comes to seeking feedback or getting someone else to look at a draft of your work, it's really important to clarify with your instructor if that kind of collaborative review is acceptable from their perspective. Another form of misconduct that sometimes people don't realize is facilitating misconduct. So if you as a student are providing feedback on somebody else's work or providing them your work to submit on their behalf, you could be accused of facilitating their misconduct, which in and of itself is a form of misconduct.
All right. If a student is accused of academic misconduct, what are the most important things for that student to know?
So first thing to know is about the policy and procedure, because the policy and procedure are going to direct the process that should be undertaken to handle the concern. So the parties involved in a case of misconduct would be the instructor, the student, and if the concern escalates, then the dean. And so the student needs to know from the policy and procedure what they can expect about that process, and to know that they have the right to assert that the policy and procedure is followed. So sometimes things are handled a little bit more casually, which, you know, a casual conversation or an informal dialogue about something that's occurred may resolve the situation. But if a student feels that the process is no longer fair, adhering to the policy and procedure gives everyone a framework that helps shape that process that can be relied on and that's consistent. Generally, the first step in a concern about academic misconduct is that the instructor, when they note the concern, they're directed through the policy to contact the student and invite them in for a conversation. Now that would be kind of via Zoom or on the phone. But if you hear from an instructor with an invitation to have a conversation about a concern, definitely take the time to ask what that concern is before you head into the meeting. So sometimes you might get an email from an instructor saying, hey, we need to talk about your term paper. It's important to know that before you get to that meeting, you have the right to know what their concerns are, so that you're actually prepared, right? So you're not walking into a meeting and hearing their concerns for the first time in that moment. If you know some of their concerns ahead of time, you can begin to prepare how you're going to respond in that meeting, or provide any supportive documentation that you might need in order to kind of back up your response to their concern. You also have the right to the full case that they have against you. So any information that they're using to support their concern should also be provided to you. And you have the right to respond. So that's usually in that initial meeting, but you can also follow up from that meeting if you have more response to provide afterwards, especially if that meeting caught you off guard and you didn't realize that's what you were going to be talking about. It's also important to know that you have the right to a support person. So that can be a friend, another student, a family member. It can also be me. So I provide support to students frequently in these kinds of meetings. It's a significant part of my work. And so when a student is having a meeting and they want accompaniment, these days, again, it's via Zoom. So I would be able to be present in a Zoom meeting. For me, my role in that situation is to witness the conversation, sometimes take some notes, and keep an eye on policy and procedure to make sure that proper process is being followed. The last thing I would say that's important to know is take the time to be as thoroughly prepared for your meeting as possible, so that you both understand your rights and the policy, and that you have any supportive documentation that might reinforce your position. So that might be like earlier drafts of work that you did, or notes that you took in preparation for an assessment, an exam or something. And don't hesitate to prepare notes for the meeting itself. So jotting down what it is you want to talk about, so you make sure you hit all the points that you have can be really helpful if you find yourself kind of getting off topic or overwhelmed during the process of the meeting, because it can be a little bit stressful, of course. You also might want to take notes during the meeting, and you might want to follow up with your instructor after the meeting. So sometimes students will send a quick email to their instructor after the fact saying, hey, we had a Zoom meeting on this day. We talked about your concerns about misconduct. I heard you say, you know, X, Y, Z. My response was A, B, C. I think that the next step is, you know, you're going to get back to me by the end of the week, or I'm going to follow up with you next week. Can you let me know if there's anything else that I'm missing, or if I've misunderstood anything? That way you have some documentation of the conversation that happened in case later you might need that. It also offers the opportunity for your instructor to respond and say, oh, no, wait a second, there was a misunderstanding. I meant this. Or, yeah, you're correct. That is the next step. And I'll follow up with you the following week. So it just provides one more opportunity for both parties to kind of make sure that understanding is on the same page. I think that's all. Thorough answer to that question.
So if a professor has no proof of your misconduct, is it still possible for a student to be deemed guilty of the misconduct?
So this is a tricky and interesting question. And, you know, I think it's really important to understand that suspicion doesn't equate guilt. And I would always assert that when working with students. Suspicion from an instructor's perspective needs to be followed up on because they have a duty to look out for academic integrity, and it's important to the value of the institution. But it's reasonable for a student to assert that evidence be provided with documentation to any formal finding of misconduct, because they need to have a right to review the case against them, the supporting evidence, and to respond. So if a decision has been made, the student needs to know on what basis is this decision made. So suspicion in and of itself should lead to the investigative process that the instructor needs to follow through on as directed by the policy. But suspicion alone isn't enough to make a finding of guilt, as you say, in misconduct. This can be tricky because in terms of process, the professor needs to bring concerns about academic misconduct to the student for a response. And then if their concern remains after the initial conversation, the policy directs them, or the procedure directs them, to escalate that concern to the dean. So at this point, if the student still feels that they haven't been heard or their perspective isn't being appropriately considered, they can request an opportunity to meet with the dean and respond to the allegations at that level as well. It is important to remember too that the balance of things, the instructor also has a duty to follow through on concerns of misconduct. And it can feel like further accusation and a personal attack when they do kind of escalate things, especially if you feel that it's inappropriate or it is not substantiated. But sometimes they're simply following the process, or sometimes instructors are seeking that extra input. They want to hear from the dean, hey, I've got this concern, what do you think? And sometimes at that point, the concern is resolved, and sometimes it needs more response from the student in order to get to a clearer outcome. Certainly, if you are found or accused of misconduct and the finding in the end is not substantiated by evidence, and yet you are left with a formal accusation of misconduct on your record, you have the right to request an appeal of that decision.
All right, perfect. So how might committing an academic misconduct affect you in the future? For how long will it be on your record? I think it just froze. Did I freeze?
My internet cut out a little bit there, but I got the question. I think my connection's a bit unstable, so hopefully we won't have any issues.
It might be
So how might committing academic misconduct affect your future, and for how long will it be on your record? So the effect that a finding of misconduct will have will depend on a few factors. One, it depends on the severity of the misconduct, and it also depends on whether it's a first instance of misconduct or a subsequent instance. So a first offense of misconduct that has a formal finding can result in anything from a failing grade on the assignment or a more severe penalty if the misconduct itself was significant and intentional, such as contract cheating, when a student, say, purchases a paper or an exam and submits it as their own. That could result in a more significant consequence than just a failing grade on the assignment, such as a failing grade in the course. Second offenses can result in failing the course and a possible suspension for a term period of 6 months or a year before a student would be able to return to the institution. In both cases, there is a record of the misconduct that's kept on what VIU calls the student's permanent record. I did send an email to registration to ask how long is that permanent record kept. The word permanent makes me think that it's going to be on that record. But I did do some looking around at other institutions too, and so sometimes there are time limits to how long that record is kept. I haven't heard back from registration, but I'm certainly happy to follow up. I only emailed them that question today, so in fairness to them, they haven't had a chance probably to get back to me. But yeah, I can definitely let you know when I do hear from them.
And so in terms, sorry.
I will add just one more thing to be aware of, and this conversation happened recently in a policy review committee that I sit on, and also I've heard of it in other readings on academic integrity, but some institutions consider removing the credentials of an already graduated student if that student is found to have committed misconduct during their studies, if that is discovered after their graduation, or say a student who is graduated from an institution and facilitates the misconduct of other students by, say, providing former exams or assignments for submission by other students. It's, you know, it's taken really seriously, and especially the very severe intentional acts of misconduct, there can be far-reaching consequences.
So in terms of like future college or university applications, will it show up on them too? So say you apply to UBC and you've committed a offense at VIU, will it follow you to UBC as well?
So how it's notated on the transcript, I'm not entirely sure. So I'll note that to ask as well. Like say you've had, say your track record on your transcripts has been good grades, and then suddenly you have a class that you failed in and you haven't been taking courses for a year. Another institution might ask, hey, tell me about what happened here. And there could be all kinds of explanations for that are not misconduct, but an institution may look at something like that with a question. But it may be the case that it is on transcripts that move from one institution to another.
All right. So if in a group project your teammate plagiarizes and you do not notice this, and now the whole team is accused of academic misconduct, what are your options?
Really good and hard question. So misconduct in a group project is really tricky because the implications of one person can spread to the whole. So the question you've asked is what are your options after it's occurred? I'm going to talk a little bit first about before it occurs, in the sense that this is a really great question to bring to your instructor. So if you're in a course and you're being assigned group work, optimally asking your instructor ahead of time how they handle academic misconduct in group work assignments can help clarify what everyone can expect. Sometimes instructors will hold everyone accountable for the actions of one person within the group. Sometimes they assert that they can't isolate who did what or who ultimately held responsibility. Other times instructors will isolate the individual who is responsible for the misconduct, and the consequence will be to that individual only. But there's lots of instances with group work that make it really challenging. You know, if everybody needs to submit a component of the work and it's due Monday morning at 8 a.m. and somebody's submission comes in at 2 in the morning on, you know, Monday, it's not reasonable that everyone can review that work to screen for possible plagiarism by a teammate, right, in the group. And also students can assert that it actually isn't their responsibility to investigate their co-students' work for possible misconduct. And that's a tricky position to put each group member in. I think, you know, in terms of planning group work, diligent work to document who was responsible for which aspect of the work, and a commitment up front between all of the group members to assure that, you know, any submission is either made enough in advance before the deadline for the group work that everybody else can review that work, or that the commitment is made to be free of any misconduct so that everyone knows that they're meeting that same standard. Which all students have an obligation to do anyway, regardless of any agreement within a group. But having a discussion ahead of time can reinforce that expectation. But really, I would assert, like, if an instructor is assigning group work, ask the question and try and ask it in class so that everyone in the class is a part of that dialogue. So, you know, if there's a conversation in class with that instructor where you can say, hey, I have a question about the group work. How do you handle instances of academic misconduct within a group, so that everybody benefits from understanding the instructor's position, and that information is known upfront, so that if then an instance does occur, everybody can go back and say, okay, we had this conversation, we understand that this is going to be the process.
All right, so this is important just for now. With all classes being brought online for this semester, what do you fear will be the most common academic misconduct allegations students might face? And how do you deal with an allegation if you are innocent?
Yeah, great question as well. And so I think, with traditional assessment measures like exams, the way they would formally be done in classroom settings, they're very hard to invigilate online with the same confidence for instructors that they would have if they were assigning an exam in class, where they're able to observe the environment and there's a high level of control around what material students have on their desks, and a visual ability to see what students are doing or not doing. So I guess my concern would be that there's going to be a little bit more suspicion of misconduct, simply because the probability or the possibility to cheat may be perceived as higher in the privacy of individual students' homes. Instructors can't be as confident of what the parameters are in each student's home, and whether or not they're meeting that expectation or requirement to maintain academic integrity. So, I think instructors are really well positioned when they format assignments in new and innovative ways that mitigate cheating. And I know many are doing that as they've transitioned to an online learning model. But I also know that that puts a significant burden on instructors sometimes to reformat their assessment methods, and increases their workloads. If instead of marking multiple choice exams, they're reviewing large term papers, that can be, a significant difference in terms of the time commitment for faculty. And also, it's just not always feasible to change the assessment methods. Sometimes certain subjects actually need a formal exam. And so figuring out how to do that in a way that ensures integrity as much as possible and balances students' need for privacy as well, so that students aren't feeling like their computer or their home is being invaded through a need to have their work observed in a way that they might rather not have, right? I know that instructors have a lot of metrics in the back end of any of the assessment or learning software, so VIU Learn or D2L, things like that. They can get a lot of information while they're administering online tests about the test takers' patterns throughout that test. So they have opportunities to get some information, and hopefully faculty members, instructors, as they're looking at concerns, they're able to kind of balance that surely a little bit natural suspicion that's going to come about given the circumstances, with their duty to provide evidence to support their concerns, so that students aren't facing accusations when they're innocent and haven't committed misconduct. A student who is innocent and finds themselves accused, again, should review the policy and procedure and seek out support. So come chat with me and I can help you understand, how to best respond to the allegation structure, and how to document the work that you've done, so that you have as much evidence as possible ahead of time.
Right. So lastly, as a student advocate, what is your advice to students during this online semester in order to avoid these accusations? Like, how can we, as students, make sure it doesn't happen?
Yeah, so definitely make sure you know what the policy and procedure, know what you're expected to do and not do, understand the policies around academic integrity so that you are able to uphold that. Also, make sure you clarify with your instructor anytime there is a question around what is okay and what isn't okay. If an exam is open book, what does that mean? Does that mean you can have your textbook, all your notes, and your internet browser open, or does it mean you just get one page of notes? Like, really specific questions can help, because sometimes there's a misunderstanding, and so clarifying that can make a huge difference. Anytime you have a concern or you're not sure, bring it up with your faculty member or review their course outline for any specifics. Also, document your work, keep your drafts, so that you're able to show the iterative process of the work that you're doing. Keep your study notes, and be prepared to demonstrate the work as your own. Also, if you find yourself in a situation where you're needing to respond to an instructor, it can be hard not to take it personally, because it does feel very personal, but it is also the case that your instructor may simply be following the process that they're required to follow. And often through a good conversation or collaboration, you can find, an understanding of what did occur. And often an informal conversation is all that it takes. And if not, seek the support that's going to help you to find a resolution.
All right, that was all the questions I had.
Awesome.
If there's anyone that has any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask it now, or just write it in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And we'll wait a few minutes.
I don't have any questions. All my questions have been answered already by Alicia. Thank you so much for asking that. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate your guidance.
Yeah, no worries. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right. I think that was it then. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here and for offering to help students overall. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Reach out anytime.
Yeah, and you guys have her email here too. And when we post this recording, we will also post a link to the VIUSU and to Sarah's email as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.